y'all. Welcome to Criminalist Behavior Podcast, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart of Louisiana's history and current, most chilling true crime stories. I'll guide you through the darkness of these crimes and all of those involved. Each week, we dig deep on those forgotten crimes or those crimes currently happening with the underlying legends that continue to haunt us. So lean in, listen, and get ready because true crime is anything but ordinary. Stay with me as we unravel what happened in these mysteries. So today we're on episode number 5, season 2. And if this is your first time listening, hi, my name is Sarah Soudier, and I'm your host for Criminalist Behavior Podcast. I want to thank you for listening to the show, and I hope you enjoy it. So, this episode was supposed to come out yesterday, Wednesday at 8 a.m., but I was sick, and I just had to work late as well, so sick and working late, yeah, not a good combination. So I am recording this on a Thursday evening after work, and it'll be released Thursday night, but y'all probably won't be listening it into the following day on Thursday. So my apologies for that, but life be lifing, y'all. So, trigger warning. This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. So this case is the Courtney Coco case, and this is part 2. So if you did not listen to part 1, I suggest you stop where you're at now, go listen to part 1, and then come back and listen to this episode. So we went over what happened, and I'm going to give you a little synopsis to catch you up a little bit, just so, it's fresh in your memory. But Courtney Coco was from Alexandria, Louisiana, and she was killed on October 4th of 2004. Her body was discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Winnie, Texas. And authorities suspected that she had been strangled and wrapped in her own comforter from her home. And it wasn't until 15 years later when her mom, Stephanie, reached out to Woody Overton, that guy. If you don't know who Woody Overton is, then where are you? Because Woody Overton is high in the true crime world, first and foremost. He actually hosts the podcast Real Life and Real Crime. And he said that he would agree to cover Courtney Coco's case as long as he could air it on his podcast. So he released the episode for Courtney on September 6, 2019. Now, Courtney was a 19-year-old college student who came from Rapides Parish, Louisiana, and she was actually pursuing a degree in criminal justice at Northwestern State University. The last time her mother, Stephanie Bellegarde, saw her alive was on October 1st, 2004. And this is when she recounted that it was the first day of the opening season for Squirrels, and they had plans to go camping for the weekend, but Courtney was at her house. She invited her to join them on the first day of squirrel hunting and camping, but Courtney actually declined that offer because she really wasn't fond of camping. And she said that she was always dedicated to improving herself and shaping her future. So now we're going to get to Monday, October 4th, 2004. And this is when the partially clothed and decaying remains of 19-year-old Courtney Coco were discovered in that abandoned structure located on Farm Market Road 1406, which was adjacent to Interstate 10 in Winnie, Texas. And despite various leads during the investigation, like I said, the case went cold until 15 years later when they had law enforcement apprehend a suspect who was engaged to Courtney's sister, Lacey. And that suspect's name, David Anthony Burns. So that's where we're at in this case. So David Anthony Burns was arrested, and there was actually a witness that saw a car at that abandoned warehouse, and there was a rice festival going on, and there was mixed up stories, mixed up dates, and pretty much we now caught up on what pretty much went down. So Lacey Evans was the sister of Courtney, and she had been engaged to Mr. Burns for 6 years. During her testimony, Lacey stated that her last conversation with Courtney occurred on a Thursday. On the early morning of the subsequent Saturday, she and her fiance had an argument, after which he left. And Burns returned approximately 30 minutes to an hour later, only to leave again shortly thereafter. Now, Lacey did not see Burns again until that Monday, the day when Courtney's body was actually found. So, Lacey and Burns cohabited and shared a single vehicle. Lacey mentioned that Burns had given her a promise ring, and upon receiving Courtney's jewelry from the funeral home, Lacey discovered a gold ring that fit perfectly with her promise ring. Now, this resembled a wedding set, so that means Burns gave the promise ring to Lacey and the other part to her sister, Courtney. How fucking off is he? So, with that being said, the discovery heightened her suspicions that Courtney and Burns were involved in a secret relationship. Lacey noted that Courtney and Burns would often vanish simultaneously. And on one occasion, when Lacey called Burns' phone, he inadvertently answered, allowing her to hear Courtney's voice in the background. And when she confronted them about her concerns about them possibly being in a relationship or messing around, both Courtney and Burns denied having any type of affair. So, Lacey recalled that Courtney owned a leopard print comforter, which she claimed to have seen on one identical to it at Burns' mother's house approximately 4 years after Courtney passed away. So, the state presented 3 videos that was recorded by Lacey showing Burns driving around the time of Courtney's death. And Lacey contested Detective Green's account regarding her level of cooperation during this investigation. During cross-examination, Lacey was presented with a timeline that confirmed her last phone call with Courtney occurred on a Friday. She conceded that the call took place on Friday, contradicting her earlier statement that it was on a Thursday. So her stories get mixed up, the days are mixed up, but if she's anything like me, I mean, days intertwine with one another, and this is literally 15 years later. So Lacey admitted to being a person of interest in the investigation that was conducted back in 2004. She testified that she interacted with Courtney daily due to their work relationship, yet she did not pay any attention to Courtney's ring. Furthermore, Lacey suggested that the comforter she observed at the residence of Burns' mother's might not have been the one that belonged to Courtney. After Courtney passed away, Lacey discovered a bag containing a license and other items that Courtney had concealed in her home. So the license was identified as belonging to Alexandria Wolf, which was Courtney's former roommate. And Lacey recounted that Wolf had threatened to harm Courtney with a weapon after being evicted from the residence. Notably, Lacey stated that she had never met Wolf. So Charlene Goldman, who was married to Chris Clark, which was a friend of Burns, testified during the trial about several concerning discussions she had with Burns. One significant conversation arose when Burns mentioned Bill, an individual Goldman had witnessed murdered her friend's husband. So Goldman recounted that Burns boasted about Bill having killed someone in cold blood and only serving a 17-year sentence. When questioned about whether Burns spoke of Courtney, Goldman replied the following. He would just make comments about the trip to Texas, her body being found in the warehouse wrapped up, and her Mustang, just different things along the lines that, I mean, I didn't know Courtney, so I mean, I would just listen. So Goldman provided testimony indicated that she, Clark, and Burns traveled to Toledo Bend, where they engaged in a discussion regarding Courtney following Burns' consumption of alcohol. So they're sitting there drinking, having a good time, and when you know it, alcohol brings the truth out, and he gets to run in his flabbergasted. So Goldman asserted that she was unaware of any specifics related to the Courtney case at that time. And the state subsequently inquired of Goldman concerning the details of the conversation as follows, y'all. So they asked the question, did he tell you anything about what part he played in the murder of Courtney Coco? And Goldman stated he didn't say what part he played. He just said it was him and Ernest Veal and Ernest Veal's cousin. I don't know his name. I didn't. And then they asked the question, what did he say about him and Ernest Veal and Ernest Veal's cousin? And this is when Goldman stated, he told me that they all had sex with Courtney at one time, but nobody would ever get in trouble for it because they used condoms. And then she was interrupted, and they asked the question, was there an occasion where he admitted to choking Courtney to you? And Goldman stated, right, he just, and then they asked the question, okay, well, when? Where was that? And she said, it was either in Toledo Bend or Alexandria, one of the two. So then they asked the question, all right, what do you remember about him saying he choked Courtney? So this is when Goldman stated he made the comment about he did his hands like that, choking Courtney, and that was just about it. So now Burns informed Goldman that Courtney's remains was encased in a plastic that was stored in a warehouse that was located in Winnie, Texas, near I-10. So the story's coming together, y'all. And of course, it took alcohol to bring this out. But when questioned about the involvement of a silver Mustang in the matters related to Courtney Coco, Goldman confirmed its significance. She's recounted having several discussions with Burns that regarded Courtney during the years of 2009 or 2010. And Goldman said that she provided a statement to the Austin Police Department around the same period, noting that her knowledge of Courtney's death was limited to what she had encountered through the news reports. So she really didn't know much other than drinking with him, and he's sitting there running his cock coaster. But now she's saying it was because of the news reports. Okay, which one is it? So during cross-examination, Goldman revealed that she subsequently discovered Veal's prior relationship with Courtney and his status as a person of interest in the investigation. She mentioned that Veal had been sentenced to 40 years for the murder of her friend's husband, but only served at 17. So Goldman testified that she might have been aware of Courtney's body being found in Texas prior to her dialogue with Burns. So furthermore, she clarified that Burns indicated the choking incident was distinct from the sexual encounter involving him, Veal, and Veal's cousin. So Goldman noted that while Burns referenced a Mustang, she was uncertain about its specific use in the whole ordeal. So this is when Lieutenant Carla Whitstein from the Alexandria Police Department provided her testimony. And she stated that the phone records revealed that Courtney made a call to Lacey Evans' landline during Lacey's working hours on September 8th of 2004. She also was uncertain if Burns had answered the call. The last recorded use of Courtney's phone in Alexandria occurred on October 2nd of 2004 at 4:30 in the morning, while the phone became active in Houston on October 3rd at 10 p.m. So, Anna Laborde, which is Coco's grandma, testified that her last visit to Courtney's residence took place approximately 3 weeks prior to the discovery of Courtney's body. And Laborde noted that a shower curtain adorned with fish and seashells was missing when she entered the house in the weeks following Courtney's death. So during cross-examination, Laborde acknowledged that she had mentioned the missing shower curtain to Paul, but had not informed anyone else about it. So you remember how Goldman was stated that during that drunk conversation with Burns that he wrapped her in plastic and placed her into that abandoned warehouse in Winnie, Texas? Yeah, this shower curtain was that plastic that she was referring to. And then the whole comforter missing for Courtney's room that she was also found in. So, Seamus Setliff was married to Tiffany Cedars from 2001 and 2013. And he is brought up because he had been friends with Burns since childhood and had known Courtney since her early years. Now, Seamus testified that approximately 1 month before Courtney's death, he participated in a camping trip to Louisiana dunes alongside of Courtney, Lacey, and Burns. And a video from this trip was dated February 21st of 2004. However, Setliff recalled that the trip occurred during the Labor Day weekend, as he sustained injuries from a four-wheeler accident during that time. Setliff expressed that he believed that there was an inappropriate relationship that was developing between Burns and Courtney Coco. Following Courtney's death, Burns contacted Setliff the subsequent week, informing him that the police had discovered her body and stated the following: "He's done it." The state also inquired about a recorded conversation that Setliff had with his ex-wife, Cedars. So Setliff indicated that he was likely at a residence not shared with Cedars during the weekend of Coco's murder. At that time, he was working for the Lafayette Drug Company, where he was responsible for delivering goods to various retail locations. He asserted that his deliveries extended as far as Port Arthur, although he denied making any deliveries to Winnie, Texas. In a previous statement to law enforcement, Setliff mentioned that his delivery route included Winnie, Texas, and he had passed the abandoned building where Coco's body was discovered 3 times during the weekend of her disappearance. So, at the beginning, he made a statement that, yeah, his route included Winnie, Texas, and now he's saying his route didn't include it. So, suspicious as hell? I think so. So, he testified that he became aware of the appearance of Courtney's body by listening to a true crime podcast that was focused on her case. You know, that Woody Overton podcast? Yeah. So Setliff informed Cedars that listening to that true crime podcast where Courtney's body appeared blue from the waist up, he also stated that his close friend, William Ahart, owned a red Mustang with silver ground effects in 2004. So now he's bringing another person into the picture. During cross-examination, Setliff acknowledged that he had spoken with the police on 3 separate occasions. He provided 3 different statements, and in his final statement, given 2 or 3 weeks prior to the trial, Setliff retracted all allegations he had previously made against Burns. He was once again questioned regarding his location during the weekend of Courtney's disappearance. And this is how it went in the courtroom, y'all. They asked, "Isn't it true that when you came back from that mysterious weekend of being gone, didn't your ex-wife find panties in your van?" And Setliff stated, "No, sir." They then followed up with the question, "Didn't she find cellophane wrap in your van?" And Setliff said, "Yes, she did, but because I got pallets of stuff wrapped in cellophane." So they followed up with a question, "Didn't she say you came home smelling the worst stink she's ever smelled in her entire life?" And Setliff's like, "Oh yeah, I didn't know that." And they said, "The smell of death, sir? Did you have the smell of death on you?" And of course that looks like a camping trip maybe, but not death. So then he said, "I probably smelled pretty rough after a weekend." So Setliff stated that he traveled to Texas on Monday morning, and however, contrary to his previous testimony, he asserted, "I have never been to Winnie, Texas." Now, Tiffany Cedars testified that she was unaware of Setliff's whereabouts during that weekend of Courtney's disappearance. And she recounted that Setliff had mentioned he would not be returning home due to injuries he incurred from that four-wheeler accident. And upon his return home around 2 or 3 o'clock on Monday morning, Setliff appeared dirty and had a very unpleasant odor. And Cedars advised him to wash his clothes with bleach and to take a freaking shower. So while retrieving his shaving kit from Setliff's work van, this is when Cedars discovered a pair of panties that did not belong to her. And it belonged to one of her friends, at least that's what Setliff stated when she confronted him. So, Cedars testified that Setliff's work delivery route included Beaumont and Winnie, Texas. She was aware of his trip to Winnie because he had previously visited the emergency room at a hospital located there. So, in that final statement where he said he's never been to Winnie, Texas, bullshit, pull the ER records, because he obviously visited the ER in Winnie, Texas. So the state inquired about a recorded conversation between Cedars and Sutliff, and during which she mentioned that Sutliff's friend, Hart, drove that silver Mustang in 2004. So, remember how he said that it was a red Mustang with silver lining? Yeah. Well, Cedars is saying it's a silver Mustang. So during cross-examination, Cedars denied having any direct knowledge of Courtney's death, stating that any information she possessed was relayed to her by Sutliff. She acknowledged being aware of Sutliff's recent retraction of his statements, and she also indicated that Sutliff had deceived her and engaged in infidelity during their marriage. So she chose not to inform the police about their conversation as a means of retaliation for his affair. So Tanner Dryden served as a detective with the Alexandria Police Department during 2019, and this was during the reinvestigation of Courtney's case. And he recognized Beal as the individual who Griffin indicated was operating Courtney's vehicle on that Saturday. So Detective Dryden identified Burns as the person whom Wilson claimed was driving Courtney's car whenever he seen him on that Sunday. And during cross-examination, Detective Dryden stated that he had identified Wilson as a potential witness after examining the records from previous investigations. He testified that after discussing Wilson's statement to CCSO from 2004, he concluded that the date of the near accident, September 7, 2004, was inaccurate. He concurred that Wilson's original statement did not align with the timeline of Courtney's death, as Courtney was still alive on September 27th of 2004. And when defense counsel inquired whether Detective Dryden had suggested the October 4th date to Wilson, Detective Dryden provided the following testimony. Well, so what helped me establish the dates, as far as mentioned October 4th, the way he explained in an interview was that the night when he almost was in a wreck with Courtney's car, or the car we now believe was Courtney's car, that he identified Anthony David Burns in. And the days following that, he saw it on the news. That's how he was able to determine that that was the car he saw. That's why I asked about those dates. So he wasn't trying to imply or feed in or suggest that these are the dates and maybe you got your dates mixed up. You know, just trying to make him confess to some shit that he did not do or be involved in. So Detective Dryden stated that he could not locate the dates for the 2004 Rice Festival whenever he was looking for it. And the defense attorney presented Detective Dryden with a 2004 Rice Festival program, which had already been submitted as evidence. And then, this is when they asked him, so if the official start date of the Rice Festival was September 29th, and Mr. Wilson said he was doing what he was doing on Monday before it officially began, and then Detective Dryden said, then they said, what date would that have been? And then Detective Dryden said the 27th. So then they asked, what day was in his original statement? And Detective Dryden said the 27th. So Detective Dryden testified that Wilson's repeatedly claimed the incident took place the day prior to the discovery of Courtney's body. So the state recalled Lacey Evans to pose a singular question whether she was involved in her sister's murder. Because you remember that money that Courtney was about to inherit? So Lacey firmly denied any type of participation involved in her sister's death. Dr. Timothy Scanlon was presented as an expert in crime scene analysis, and he reconstructed the whole scene and accepted that role. So, he explained that there are 3 potential reasons for staging the body in a sexualized manner at a crime scene. So if you remember, whoever killed Courtney, she was placed at the door with her legs wide open, just in a very provocative position. So the first reason is to humiliate the victim, creating a shocking effect or to seek revenge. And the second reason that could be explaining this could be that the crime was perpetrated by a sexual serial killer. However, Dr. Scanlon noted that there was no evidence to support that theory in the current case. And the third reason for such staging might be to mislead law enforcement into believing that it was a sexual motive that existed when it actually wasn't. Because, as we know now, it was actually for money. It wasn't sexually motivated. It was for her money. So he testified that Courtney's body was not concealed, but rather displayed in a location where it could be readily discovered, because it was in the doorway of that abandoned warehouse in Winnie, Texas. So he indicated that the positioning of her arms and legs suggested someone had deliberately manipulated her into that particular pose. He also highlighted the significance of the fact that the lower portion of her clothing was missing. So she only had the top part of her clothing on. The state requested that Dr. Scanlon to read aloud a letter that was sent to Courtney by the health department concerning her STD diagnosis. So, Dr. Scanlon identified Courtney's residence as the primary crime scene, which he described as the location of the original criminal activity after he reviewed the photographs and the statements that were made by her family to law enforcement. He explained that the DNA and fingerprints are more critical in cases involving strangers where there is the presence of that individual's DNA or fingerprints is unexpected. Because, as you know, all of these people that are involved, and the suspect, David Anthony Burns in this case, who was the fiance of Courtney's sister to Lacey, yeah, his prints are going to be around because he was in the area. So, if it is anticipated that a person's DNA or fingerprints would be present in a certain location, the importance of discovering them is actually lessened. And it becomes impossible to ascertain when they were actually placed there. Was it before or after, right? Or during the murder? So, he acknowledged the relationship between Courtney and Landry, indicated that it would be reasonable to expect Landry's DNA to be found on the latch of Courtney's car trunk. He further stated that he wouldn't assign any additional significance to the presence of Burns' DNA in Courtney's vehicle due to their relationship. However, the absence of Burns' DNA and fingerprints did not lead Dr. Scanlon to conclude definitively whether he had been in Courtney's car. He noted that the fingerprints are frequently rendered unusable due to them being smudged or smeared. They weren't like a particularly direct contact of a fingerprint. It was smeared, right? And that DNA must be present in sufficient quantities to actually be able to be detected. So the state inquired whether the absence of any other individual's DNA on the Courtney's fingernails held any type of significance in this matter. So they asked the following question. Alright, so explain how the lack of foreign DNA doesn't mean that she wasn't murdered or that she didn't touch whoever was killing her at the time. So this is when he answered the following. Again, it's the absence of evidence. Theory. So just because she doesn't have the DNA under her fingernails doesn't mean she wasn't in an altercation. It just means that she didn't get DNA under her fingernails. It's all the other factors around a case that you rely upon in that matter. And I could tell you I've had both. I've had some with DNA under the fingernails and some violent scenes, sexual assaults, close encounters where they have not had DNA under the fingernails. So it's just the DNA is present or it's not. So then they asked the following question. So the bottom line is there any significance that this jury should draw from lack of foreign DNA under her fingernails? And this is when he said, no, sir. So initially, the police believed that the tire tracks that were found at the abandoned building in Winnie, Texas, where Courtney's body was discovered, matched those of Courtney's vehicle. And, you know, they could do those tire impressions, and there's molds and casts and stuff, and they could compare the exact tire. So, with that being said, he sought expert analysis from the Louisiana State Police, which concluded that the tire tracks did not correspond to Courtney's car. So, they tested them, and it wasn't a match. So while Dr. Scanlon acknowledged that Wilson's identification of Courtney's vehicle at the scene, he testified that there was no physical evidence linking Courtney's car to that location. Not that it wasn't there, but there was no evidence proving that it was. And during the dirt road and all that. I mean, that would be present. So he also indicated that the possibility that more than one individual could have been involved in the disposal of Courtney's body. Stephanie Belgard, which is Courtney's mother, stated that Williams was Coco's steady boyfriend at the time of her death, although she refuted the claim that Courtney exclusively dated African American men. The state presented a photograph of Courtney's prom featuring her and her date, which was not Williams, and it was Dustin Olson, who was actually Caucasian. So that claim that she only dated African American men was not so much true, because she was with this Caucasian, Dustin Olson. So Stephanie expressed her belief that Courtney intended to marry Olson in the future. Concerning Courtney's inheritance, Stephanie clarified that Courtney's father had been receiving compensation for a work-related accident prior to his death, and this financial benefit was passed on to Courtney, his only child. So, remember how they were saying previously in part 1 that Lacey and they were all after her money? Yeah, because Lacey is Courtney's sister, but that wasn't her money because Lacey and Courtney didn't have the same father. So, Courtney received a monthly sum of $1,500 along with a lump sum every 5 years. So this inheritance was widely known within Courtney's family. And Stephanie also mentioned that Courtney typically wore a t-shirt and underwear and occasionally a bra when she went to sleep. During cross-examination, Stephanie stated that she believed Courtney was being utilized by numerous individuals, and she thought this was because of the money aspect, right? So Courtney left Stephanie's residence upon her high school graduation, and the defense attorney inquired whether Courtney's inclination to date African American men became a source of disagreement after she left her mom's home. And Stephanie indicated that they did not discuss that matter, but acknowledged that the majority of Courtney's partners were of African American descent. So after Stephanie's testimony concluded, the state rested its case. So now we got Dr. Stephen Norman, and he was recognized as an expert in the fields of the anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology. And he achieved a board certification in anatomic and clinical pathology in 1982. And from 1984 until 2004, he served as a deputy coroner at the Rapides Parish Coroner's Office before he transitioned to a private practice where he concentrated on autopsies and laboratory management. So, his engagement with Courtney's case commenced in 2016 when a detective from Rapides Parish Sheriff's Office, aka RPSO, reached out to him, and that detective requested an examination of several cold case files. And to facilitate his analysis, Dr. Norman received 3 sets of documents: the autopsy report prepared by Dr. Brown, which included the toxicology report from 2004, the toxicology report from 2015, and a crime lab report from the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory. And following his review, Dr. Norman drafted a report for RPSO, in which he determined that Courtney's cause of death was due to an overdose resulting from a combination of ethanol and tramadol. His report elaborated on the rationale behind his conclusion. So, the toxicology analysis indicated that the autopsy report, the Tox 2004, was noteworthy due to the absence of any indication that blood samples were actually analyzed. So the sole sample appears to be from the spleen, an organ that is not typically examined in his experience. Nonetheless, when it comes to ethanol, the spleen can serve as a reasonable indicator, and the detected level of 0.32% of ethanol suggests that a comparable concentration would likely have been present in Courtney's blood. Furthermore, the analysis of the stored blood that was conducted 11 years later in Toxicology Report 2015 revealed a level of 0.178%, which reinforces the initial finding. as it is well documented that stored blood tends to exhibit a decrease in the ethanol concentration over a matter of time. So when considering the 11 years of storage in this instance, the ethanol levels reported in the TOX 2004 report and the TOX 2015 report are quite similar, and it lended credibility to the original measurement. So it is important to take into account that post-mortem there can also be endogenous production of small quantities of ethanol due to the breakdown of glucose and bacterial activity. Now, this production can reach levels up to 0.15%, and although such maximum levels typically do not manifest until the 10th day after death, so it actually increases more and more as the days go by after you are deceased. And it actually is able to be detected around the second or third day. So the ethanol concentration detected in the spleen in the Toxicology 2004 report is likely a close representation of the level that would have been present in Courtney's blood at the time of her death. So that concentration is significantly elevated and could be fatal in certain individuals. And additionally, the Toxicology 2015 report indicated the presence of tramadol, which was at a concentration at 1100 nanograms per milliliter. So while there is no available literature to determine whether this level would diminish over time, it is reasonably to conclude that it would not increase. So he believed that this concentration accurately reflects what was in Courtney's blood at the time of her death. Although this level is considered very high and may be classified as toxic by many people, it is not necessarily lethal on its own. However, because of the combined effects of ethanol and tramadol on sedation are not merely additive. So mixing the two, alcohol and the tramadol, can have adverse side effects. So they are potentiating. So therefore, he concluded that the cause of Courtney Megan Coco's death was an overdose of both ethanol and tramadol. So Dr. Norman acknowledged that Dr. Bonnell had reviewed the case in 2007, and he authored a one-page letter concurring with the initial findings of Dr. Brown. He expressed a lack of respect for Dr. Bonnell's opinion, characterizing him as a quote-unquote hired gun who profited from providing testimony. So Dr. Norman suggested that Dr. Bonnell could be influenced to support any position. So his word was not his bond. And it is important to note that Dr. Norman was not retained by the defense counsel. So additionally, Dr. Norman testified that there are 5 recognized manners of death: homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, and undetermined. So he asserted that the most probable manner of Courtney's death was accidental. While he believed that Dr. Brown's autopsy was likely conducted in a thorough and comprehensive manner, he deemed Dr. Brown's ultimate conclusions to be absolutely ridiculous. Dr. Norman contended that the cause and manner of death should have been classified as undetermined given the information available in 2004. He criticized that Dr. Brown was concluding it to be a homicide based solely on the fact that Courtney's body was disposed of, and disagreed with the assertion that the gum found in her stomach supported a finding of homicide by asphyxiation. Dr. Norman noted that it is common for gum to be present in the stomachs of deceased individuals. He found no evidence to substantiate Dr. Brown's speculation that Courtney had been chewing the gum at the time of asphyxiation, which would have led to her swallowing it. So as a result, Dr. Norman expressed his complete disagreement with Dr. Brown's conclusions. So during a cross-examination, Dr. Norman stated that throughout his whole entire career, he has conducted autopsies on 50 individuals who met violent deaths. He acknowledged that he is not board certified in forensic pathology and that his last formal training in this field occurred in 1978. Dr. Norman expressed the view that it would be reasonable to assume that a non-alcoholic individual with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.25 would be unconscious. However, he did not believe that an alcoholic at the same level would be able to function normally. So he admitted that he did not consult with any of Courtney's relatives or friends to assess her tolerance to drugs and alcohol. Furthermore, he testified that he had not reviewed any type of police reports, examined the crime scene photographs, or spoken with anyone or the responding officers at the scene. So while he concurred that gathering background information is very beneficial to the case in his findings, he emphasized that it should not be solely relied upon to determine the cause and manner of death. So on redirect examination, this is when Dr. Norman noted that it is a standard practice in forensic autopsies to collect vitreous humor, or fluid from the eyes. And this is to ascertain how much of that alcohol concentration may be attributed to the process of the decomposition stage. He expressed surprise that vitreous humor was not collected in this instance, as it could have clarified many of the outstanding questions. Following Dr. Norman's testimony, the defense concluded its case. So, this is when David Anthony Burns decided to do an appeal. So, he contended that the state had not established that a homicide actually took place. Alternatively, should a homicide be acknowledged, he asserted that the evidence that was presented is insufficient to demonstrate his involvement in the crime. And there were arguments regarding Courtney's cause and manner of death. So, Burns' primary assertion before this court is that the state had failed to demonstrate that Courtney's death resulted from homicide rather than an accidental overdose. And he also encapsulated his argument as follows, and I'm going to read this to y'all. Courtney exhibited no apparent signs of trauma and was significantly intoxicated at the time of her death. It is reasonable to initially conclude that the circumstances surrounding her discovery suggested foul play. However, the positioning of her body in a different state and in a sexually suggestive manner does not substantiate the occurrence of a homicide. Given that the autopsy did not provide a conclusive cause of death, these circumstances are primarily what led Dr. Brown to classify the death as a homicide rather than another cause. So, if she apparently died accidentally by ODing on the alcohol and the tramadol mixture, why the fuck was she found naked and in a provocative pose with her legs spread open? Yeah. Make it make sense. Obviously, foul play is involved. Now, was there some nasty shit happening and they just want to have sex with a dead body after the... I don't freaking know. But it does lead to suspicion that this is actually a homicide and not a fucking accidental overdose. So, Burns then pointed out that Dr. Brown acknowledged the absence of a definitive conclusion from the findings of the body to support the claim as homicide, indicating that the autopsy was actually inconclusive. So the sexual assault kit return had negative results, and there was no foreign DNA that was detected under Courtney's fingernails, suggesting there was no struggle that took place. So Burns notes that there was no testimony or evidence in the autopsy that indicated any typical signs of asphyxiation. So if you know anything about any type of strangulation or asphyxiation, you do know that most of the time when someone is strangled, the hyoid bone is actually broken. But if you're smothered, that might not always be the case. So, this is where we're at. So, the defendant noted that there was no testimony or evidence in the autopsy that indicated any typical signs of asphyxiation, such as the visceral congestion through the dilation of the venous blood vessels and blood stasis, petechiae, cyanosis, and any fluidity of the blood. Additionally, the toxicology report from 2015 indicated that Courtney had tramadol, ecstasy, and alcohol in her system, which could have contributed to her death. So, he's throwing in ecstasy. Where in the hell in the reports did it say that she had ecstasy? Because in the reports, if you recall, it said ethanol and tramadol. There was no mix of ecstasy in this. So, what are you saying? Dr. Brown's conclusion of the homicide was partially based on the circumstances surrounding the discovery of Courtney's body. So in response, Burns presented an alternative explanation that is consistent with Dr. Norman's assessment of an accidental overdose and the conditions under which Courtney's body was found. This is when he suggested that an individual who was with Courtney may have panicked after she overdosed on drugs and alcohol, leading them to place her body in the trunk of her car. So this is victim blaming at its fucking finest. This theory, according to Burns, could account for the fact that Courtney's body remained in the trunk for as long as 52 hours before being disposed of Winnie. So, you're saying that Courtney's body was in the trunk for 52 hours. How the fuck would you know that? How would you know that unless you were there? So, this theory, according to Burns, could account for the fact that it was there for 52 hours before it was disposed in Winnie, Texas, in that abandoned warehouse. So Burns asserted that if the intention had been to murder Courtney, then the perpetrator would have not delayed the disposal of her body, as a premeditated plan would have been in effect. So he's suggesting that if a murder was actually planned, they would have planned out where they were going to place this body, not keep her ass in the trunk for 52 hours. Okay, I guess. Or you just fucking dumb. So then, this is when Burns highlighted Dr. Scanlon's testimony, which indicated that a body might be positioned in a manner to suggest a sexual motive. So he's listening through this whole trial, and then in his appeal, he's using that to try to help his ass out of... It's just disgusting. So Burns maintained that it is clear Courtney died prior to her body being discarded in Winnie, Texas, and that someone must have transported her there. However, he argued that the state did not meet its burden of proof to establish that Coco's death was actually a homicide. So, the state asserted that the jury encountered two conflicting experts' testimonies, Dr. Brown, representing the state, and Dr. Norman, representing the defense expert, held opposing views regarding the cause of Courtney's death, and this was debating whether it was due to asphyxiation or an accidental overdose. So despite Dr. Norman's disagreement with Dr. Brown's findings, the state argued that the jury had a reasonable basis to dismiss Dr. Norman's testimony in favor of Dr. Brown's. So, I would say because he's an expert, right? Dr. Norman was not an expert. So, keep that in mind. So, furthermore, the jury was made aware that two forensic pathologists, Dr. Bonnell and Shaker, examined the case and concurred with Dr. Brown's conclusions. So, the state concluded that the jury's verdict was rational and should remain undisturbed on any appeal. Moreover, the state maintained that the jury's determination of murder is only interpretation that adequately accounted for the array of evidence that was presented on behalf of Burns. So there was arguments regarding Burns' identification as the perpetrator, and this is when he asserted that even if the state had established that a homicide took place, it had not demonstrated that Burns was responsible for the homicide or acted as an accomplice in the murder. So this is when Burns emphasized that there was no evidence or testimony linking Anthony Burns to Courtney Coco prior to her death during the weekend in question. Importantly, there were no eyewitness accounts placing Burns with Courtney at that time, no phone records suggesting their presence together, and no forensic evidence found in her residence or vehicle that would connect him to her. So this is when Burns argued that the fundamental issue of who was responsible for Courtney's death remained speculative and unresolved. Burns maintained that the circumstantial evidence does not eliminate the plausible theory that one of the many other suspects, rather than Burns, was responsible for Courtney's murder. And as previously mentioned, there was actually a significant number of persons of interest, including her own sister, Lacey Evans, right? And suspects identified during both the initial and subsequent investigations. So Burns specifically points out that Beale, who was recognized as having driven Courtney's vehicle in Alexandria on October 2nd, 2004, was currently incarcerated for another homicide. So he's suggesting that it was Beale that did that shit. So additionally, Landry's DNA, which was Courtney's former boyfriend, was discovered on the latch of Courtney's car trunk, which could have been there. They were dating. So, moreover, the last phone call made by Courtney before her disappearance was either Williams or Williams' girlfriend. However, this is when Burns notes that there was no testimony regarding Floyd Williams or Jitty's history of violent behavior. So now he's suggesting, well, it could have been Veal, or maybe it's Floyd Williams or Jitty. Okay. Just take the heat off of you, right? So in the present matter, there was no witnesses possessing direct knowledge regarding the circumstances of Courtney's death. Consequently, the state had the obligation to establish the Burns' culpability through alternative evidence. Because it wasn't all just circumstantial. Remember, he got drunk that one night and he blabbed his mouth? So specifically, the state introduced evidence indicated that Burns was seen departing from the structure where Courtney's remains were actually discovered, as well as he made that self-incriminating remark to multiple individuals years following Courtney's death. So this is when Burns contended that the identification of him exiting the abandoned building is questionable at best. And he asserted that the context of each incriminating statement, whether made while incarcerated or under the influence, along with conflicting claims, renders each statement mutually inconsistent and exceedingly unlikely. So, y'all, we are almost done, but it's just like this whole rigmarole happening. So, having reviewed the fundamental principles, this is when they considered particularly instances that informed the court's evaluation of the current matter. What was this matter? Well, while Burns asserted that the state did not prove that Courtney was murdered, he failed to reference or analyze any cases that made him suggest that. So the jury was presented with comprehensive testimony from 3 expert witnesses concerning the circumstances of Mary Horton Vale's death. Specifically, whether she was, because now they're bringing into, his past, right? So specifically whether she was deceased prior to entering the water or if she succumbed after her entry. So these experts provided their professional opinions regarding the events leading to her death, drawing from the available reports and evidence as well as their assessments of the cause of death. So 2 experts determined that Mary Horton Vale's death was a homicide, while 1 expert concluded it was an accidental drowning. So the jury carefully considered the detailed testimonies of all the 3 experts, examined photographs, and reviewed the autopsy report. And in light of the conflicting expert opinions, the jury actually had the discretion to accept the opinion that they believed most accurately represented the facts of the case. And as outlined in Louisiana Code Evidence Art 702, an appellate court is generally reluctant to overturn the jury's decision to favor one expert's opinion unless that opinion is clearly flawed. And that was established in the State versus Ellis. So upon thorough examination of the experts' testimonies, they did not find their opinions regarding the cause and manner of death was actually flawed. So in conclusion, concerning the circumstances surrounding Courtney's death, the jury was presented with the divergent expert testimonies. And the defense was allowed to question Dr. Brown's conclusions, and in light of these conflicting expert opinions, the jury had the discretion to favor the expert whose explanation of facts they found most compelling. So they did have, those 2 different testimonies from the experts. So in light of these conflicting expert opinions, referring to Ellis 677, they determined that Dr. Brown's assertion that Courtney's death resulted from homicide is not without merit, as the circumstantial evidence and testimonies provided support his claim that she was asphyxiated through smothering, not choking or strangling. So although some witnesses offered inconsistent accounts regarding the Burns' purportedly incriminated remarks, Durson did confirm that Burns acknowledged smothering Coco with a pillow. So, in the appeal regarding his conviction for the second-degree murder of Courtney Coco, this is when Burns contended that the evidence presented to the jury was inadequate to establish his guilt for the charge. Alternatively, he argued that even if a homicide occurred, there was insufficient evidence to prove that he was actually the one that did it. So, as previously noted, this is when the jury faced conflicting and contradictory testimonies and evidence, necessitating the resolution of multiple factual disputes. So, when considering the evidence in most favorable light for the prosecution, any reasonable tier of fact could have been determined that the essential elements of the crime were proven beyond a reasonable doubt, establishing David Anthony Burns guilty for the second-degree murder of Courtney Coco. So, this is when a jury in Rapides Parish deliberated for only 90 minutes, aka 3 hours. And this is before they convicted this Boyce man on Monday for the 2004 murder of 19-year-old Courtney Coco, eliciting subdued sobs from her family and supporters. Yes, they convicted David Anthony Burns for second-degree murder of Courtney Coco. So, then this brings us to October 31st of 2022. He was found guilty and convicted of that second-degree murder. And on November 28th, 2022, damn near a month later, this was when he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was handed down by Judge Mary Doggett on Tuesday, November 29th, 2022, in Rapides Parish Courthouse. And this is what the judge said, because I know we're all interested in that and love to hear them just giving it to them. The best thing that I can say is that an extreme difficulty case. We knew it from the outset that District Attorney Philip Terrell. This is a case we inherited when we came into office 8 years ago, nearly 9 years ago now. We chose not to be pushed by politics, not to be pushed by the media, not to be pushed by the family into proceeding at the pace that other people wanted us to go. We did bow to politics or public opinion. We did this in what we felt was the right way. We investigated in the right way. Loved ones have waited 18 years for a resolution and conviction. That's what we're going to do today. And that was part of the victim impact statements. So Courtney's maternal aunt, Michelle Paul, went first with her impact statement. And this is what she said. Why? Why did you do this to somebody you supposedly loved? You are such a coward. Paul told the court that Burns was a pallbearer at Courtney's funeral, standing by her gravesite. You took her life and made sure she had no dignity in her death. And Paul said she didn't have it in her heart to forgive Burns yet. So she wasn't forgiving him, but maybe within time she possibly could. Lynn Ray, another one of Coco's maternal aunts, also spoke. And she talked about Burns' close relationship with the family and how much it hurt to learn that he was responsible for Courtney's death. And she said the following. I think this is what hurts me the most. You deceived our family. And Ray told Burns that he played God that day. She also made it a point to call out his defense attorney. And she said, I highly disagree with you, attorney Mr. LaCour. He said you were convicted because of sympathy by the jury because we were crying. How will we not cry? So Ray's daughter, Candace Churchman, spoke about the close cousin relationship she had with Courtney. She also spoke about her young daughter, and she said the following. She looks like Courtney and acts like Courtney. Sometimes it hurts, but it's also the biggest comfort. She explained that every little milestone that her daughter has achieved has been partnered with her family's sadness that Courtney won't be able to achieve the same. She said, you broke my family. And throughout the victim impact statements, Burns largely kept his head down. He picked it up for the next victim impact statement of Ina Laborde, Courtney's maternal grandmother, lovingly referred to as Moo, which is crazy because that's what I call my cat. But I digress. Moo said, I don't think your family knows hard it is for us to stand and say these things to you. We loved you. Now, Laborde talked about her struggles as a Christian, struggles her late husband challenged her on. And she said, I've always been an awesome Christian, but the forgiveness thing, I'm having issues with that. Laborde thanked God for allowing her to be there for the trial and the victim impact statements, moments she thought she might not have after being diagnosed with esophageal cancer after Burns was arrested in April of 2021. And she also said this, and y'all, the love this woman must have. This is Courtney's grandma, y'all. She said, I love you. I love you, Burns. You hate the sin, but you love the sinner. Umu is going to do her best to pray for forgiveness. She then had a challenge for Burns. She said, I want you and I to both pray really hard that we see each other in a better place. You made a bad decision. Do you still love me, Anthony? I love you, Burns answered. Finally, 18 years after her daughter died, Courtney's mother, Stephanie Beauregard, got the chance to speak to Burns. Through tears and sometimes screams, she told him, I have zero mercy for you. Beauregard read a letter that Courtney wrote in middle school, one talking about her hopes and dreams for the future, to be married, to have 2 girls and a boy. And Courtney at the time wanted to be a pediatrician or maybe even a teacher. Later, she decided she wanted to be a crime scene investigator. And this is when her mother said the following. She wanted to make a difference in this world. You denied her that chance. A person she trusted denied her dreams and goals. Beauregard says she hates to say Burns' name or even hear it. She said, I've been holding in so much hurt, so much anger, so much misery and rage for 18 years. She said when Burns was arrested, it was bittersweet. He had been a suspect for a while. And this is when she said, I promised Courtney kneeling on her grave that I would find out who put her there. Beauregard spoke about a time in her life when Burns became a pastor. You hid behind a pulpit as a pastor of a local Baptist church only to make a mockery of God. She called him a wolf in sheep's clothing, and she said, I hate you, and I pray you rot in Angola prison, and I hope I never see your face again. And as Judge Doggett announced the new sentencing date of November 29, 2022, this is when she turned to Burns to see if he wished to address the court. He said he did. Burns stood up, turned around to face Courtney's family, calling them all out one by one. And he said the following. I sat here for 2 years, and it's the first time I've been able to speak. Y'all don't even believe this. I had nothing to do with this. Lacey, you know I was home with you that weekend. Burns said he had nothing to hide, and he made the following. Y'all know I ain't hiding anything, he said. I pray y'all actually find out who did this. I got my life straight. Y'all can't handle that. That's it, and I'm good. And y'all, that is the case of Courtney Coco. What do you think? Do you think David Anthony Burns is guilty? Is it Bill because he had a previous homicide under his belt? I mean, I think they were after her money. I don't think it was a sexual provocative motion. But let me know. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review us on any of your podcast apps, iTunes. Comment, y'all. Comment what you think. But tell your mom and them, tell your friends, you know. But also, the Women Podcasting Awards is coming back up, and I think they're going to be hosted or starting in May. I'm not 100. I think they're starting now. I have to look into that, but as you know, the pod will be part of that. So yeah, y'all look up for that. I'll be posting it in all the podcast apps as well as social media. Do check out our website. It's Criminalist Behavior Louisiana True Crime Podcast.com. On there, you'll get to see all the episodes, the free episodes. We also have Patreon. We have 2 different packages. We have the Lawn Yappers and the Go-Getters. And yeah, y'all just check it out. We have some merch on there, so be happy to see it. Also, you can also email us on a previous case, this case, or suggest a case. And that's all located on the website as well. So I want to thank you for listening to the show. And y'all be sure to come back next week because we are going to be on some more stuff. And this is going to be on Adam A.J. Brown. And this is actually the case of the Cox technician slaying that happened in Louisiana. So until then, this is your host, Sir Soudier. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Criminalist Behavior, a Louisiana True Crime Podcast. Thank y'all, and y'all have a great night. Bye.